Okay, so listen, the president, it's a tough job. The president deserves his time off. No one is saying that's a bad thing that he did, but he was so critical of the last president, and then he has all of this going on. So, David, in addition to these 13 trips on private charter planes, Tom Price also took government planes on 2 international trips. Candidate Trump said he was going to drain the swamp, yet here we are. What's going on?
Well, the problem is to drain the swamp. We've had enough time. There should be sort of concrete measures put in place. It's not just an empty promise, or it shouldn't just be an empty promise. If you care about this, you have to set standards that start with the people who work underneath you. Not only do they have to behave ethically, they have to behave beyond ethically to set an example for everybody else. And if people like Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, Price, Zinke, Scott Pruitt of the EPA, if they're able to use government resources in a way that's questionable, it sets an example for everybody else that says, look, draining the swamp, we didn't really mean it.
Mm. Hey, Richard, David just went through a lot of it, but let me remind the viewer again what it is. Price is not alone with this questionable travel. The Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, under review for a trip on a government plane, and he is also criticized for asking about using a government plane for his honeymoon. The EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt has taken private and military planes. The Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke has taken private planes, including one owned by oil and gas executives. Zinke even went so far as to call this story a little BS. But is this just the beginning of the fallout? That's a lot of folks.
That is a lot of folks. And the version I heard is that Zinke was going out to speak to a hockey team that's owned by a political contributor. I have no idea what that has to do with his job in the United States government. And the tone here is set at the top. The president has been going on down there to Palm Beach to Mar-a-Lago, and each one of those trips costs us hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. We bring Air Force One down there, and it's one thing for the president to go on a handful of vacations like President Bush did and President Obama. With President Trump, it's been every weekend, every other weekend, and now he's doing this thing at Bedminster. And he's been promoting the Trump brand when he's in the White House. He's refused to divest himself of conflicts of interest. So he's sending the message he's going to do anything he pleases in this job, and the cabinet secretaries are going to do everything they can get away with. And that's the tone he wants to set. That's what he's going to do. There's nothing we can do about it unless we want to remove him as president.
Well, I want to get your response to that, Stephen. Do you think that this is a tone, a culture that has been set by this president? I mean, he does take a lot of trips on weekends to his Trump-branded properties.
Well, no, look, I think the American people knew that Donald Trump loved to play golf and that he's a rich man. He never hid his wealth, that he liked to, visit his resorts. But look, Don, I'm a drain the swamp guy. I think the riches of Washington are incredibly unbecoming. Washington is becoming rich at the expense of the rest of the country. There's no question about that. And I think, look, I can't excuse some of these flights, but I will say this, just in preparation for this segment tonight, I looked at some of the Obama cabinet, and so you have Loretta Lynch, Leon Panetta, Eric Holder, just those three I looked up. They routinely took private jets. It's not as if this is the first time you've had cabinet agencies flying around on private jets. I'm not excusing it. I think in most cases, in some cases it probably is excusable, but for the most part, why can't they fly on commercial jets like the rest of us?
Even if that is true, which is not.
Yeah.
Which,
it is true. Yeah. It is true. I mean, they did take those flights.
Not true.
I looked it up. Yeah, it is true.
That's not true. It never happened in the Bush administration. We did not allow that in the Bush administration. Well, I talked to people in the Obama administration. That is not true.
I'm talking about the Obama administration. I'm talking about the Obama administration.
It is not
people
true.
Like
I checked that out, too. We did not tolerate that in the Bush administration, and the Obama administration was run the way ours went.
I'm not talking about Bush. I'm talking about Obama. I'm talking about Loretta Lynch, Leon Panetta, and Eric Holder. They all took private jets.
So to the extent that this administration has taken to the tune of $1 million in 8 months?
Look, I don't know what the numbers are. I'm just saying that it's happened in the past. I'm not excusing this.
That's just one guy.
Wait, hold on. When Donald Trump found out about this, he got rid of him.
But when you do that whataboutism, it does come off. Come on, Stephen, you're a very smart man, and I respect you a lot. It does come off as if you're making an excuse for it. And the whole point of this administration is we're going to drain the swamp. There's too much being spent. We're a small government. The government is taking advantage of you. And then you have one guy who is spending $1 million in 8 months on private flights, and then you have another one who's taking private planes, and then you have another one, and you have another one, and you have another one. I mean, come on, Stephen.
Well, look, Tom Price is gone.
And
because
also,
of his
and also
behavior.
before you
I mean,
said
Tom
he's
Price
a rich
is
man, and we knew that he was rich and he likes to play golf. There are golf
Yeah.
courses in Washington, D.C., and he's a rich man, but he's not paying for the Secret Service
Well,
and for those flights.
Barack Obama took trips all the way to Hawaii at the taxpayers' expense. I mean,
Not every weekend, Stephen. Not every
Well,
other weekend.
Hawaii's a long way to go. Look, I'm not excusing this. I'm not. I'm simply saying that there is a bit of a double standard here to say that Donald Trump's cabinet should be fired. When I didn't hear people say that Eric Holder should be fired. I didn't hear people say that Loretta Lynch should be fired for going around on private
Donald
jets. So
Trump
maybe they should
said
have been.
that Price should be fired. Donald Trump said that Price. Donald Trump is the one firing these people.
I know, because when he found, but that's why he's not being hypocritical. He's saying, look, if you are abusing the public trust, if you think that you're somehow royalty because you're in the government, no, that's not. They're not going to tolerate that in the Trump administration. I think it's appropriate. I don't like government officials abusing the public trust, and I think in this case, the public trust was abused.
Yeah. David, I want you to weigh in on this. David, because you've been sitting by just sort of watching this happen with your popcorn. But listen, you say if President Trump did this, he wouldn't face any punishment. Why not?
Well, the rules are different for the presidents.
Yeah.
Conflict of interest rules are different for the presidents because the people pick presidents. The president, the cabinet officials are chosen by the president. They don't have the same level of accountability of the people. So if President Trump wants to fly back and forth to Bedminster or to Mar-a-Lago to visit his properties, that's a political question. People can ask whether they think that's appropriate or not. It's not the same kind of thing as a cabinet official. But if you're setting an example, if President Trump thinks this is a big deal, thinks this matters, and he certainly seems to think it matters in the case of Tom Price, he has to enforce that with everybody else. What I'm interested in now is what precedent has he set now with this Price case for everybody else. Steve Mnuchin tries to take government plane on his honeymoon, as you mentioned. Also did fly a government plane to Fort Knox, which just happened to put him in the path of the eclipse to go inspect the gold. He wanted to inspect the gold on the one day that he needed to be in the path of the eclipse. If things like that, if President Trump is going to enforce this kind of standard about not misusing government money, taxpayer money, to fly on private planes, where does it stop, and who else has already stepped over the line in the cases we talked about? I'm interested to see how President Trump follows this up, or if it's just left to lie after Tom Price leaves.
So what CNN has obtained a memo saying that now that the White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, must approve all travel on government-owned, rented, leased, or chartered aircraft except space available travel and travel to meet mission requirements. So why? I mean, should that have been put in place in the first place? And do you think that Kelly will be able to do that, David?
I think it's a little ridiculous. This is the White House Chief of Staff policing people who are cabinet secretaries. These are not low-level employees. These are people we've entrusted with the management of huge budgets, large agencies. The idea that their specific travel, they can't be trusted to make this kind of ethical judgment on their own when we're asking them to make so many other judgments about their agencies, that they have to sort of send in a permission slip to be signed by John Kelly. I guess maybe that's the temporary measure, but it's sort of ridiculous that these people apparently require that level of supervision when they have so many other things that they're being required to decide.
So, Stephen, listen, I think everyone agrees, and you heard my caveat at the top. The president can travel wherever he wants to go. He must be protected at all times. It's a tough job. You can, if you want to take off. But do you understand that there is that maybe he might be setting an example for the rest of the administration? No?
Well, look, again, I think that, Trump has never hidden his wealth. He's made it very clear to the American people. He likes to go to Mar-a-Lago, Florida, and the American people knew that when they voted for him as president. But that's different, as you just heard from a cabinet official. And cabinet officials, I mean, look, this issue about whether they should get clearance from the White House, so there has to be somebody, there has to be an ethics office that signs off on these trips and says this is ethical and this isn't. And I think that broke down in this case. But I am impressed that Trump, when he found out about this, he instantly got rid of the cabinet officer that violated the public trust in this case.
Lively debate. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. When we come back, what a lousy week for the president, from Price to Puerto Rico to the another failure on health care, his health care proposal. And don't forget his feud with the NFL. I'm going to
question that I have for you essentially stems from an article that you've written like essentially like why atheism is morally bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And in it, you essentially say, essentially without God, we can't really have morality, or without a soul, we can't really have choice. But you seem to be presuming that the existence of the soul and the existence of God kind of basis. Do you have any like justification or evidence for those presumptions?
Sure. So the existence of, so I'm going to make now an Aristotelian / Aquinas argument for the existence of God. So the basic idea, and I'm going to try and boil this down so it makes some sense. The basic Aristotelian argument for the existence of an unmoved mover is the idea that there are a bunch of, every object around you has actual and potential, right? It has an actuality and it has potential. So if you have a candle and it's made of wax, it has the potential to be a pool of wax, but that potential is not fulfilled unless something acts upon it. The only thing that can act upon an object and make it fulfill its potential is either another object that has its own potential, or something that is pure actuality, right? It does not have any potential. It's just actual. It just exists, right? So the idea in the Aristotelian argument for God is that if you don't want an infinite regress of causes, if you don't want an infinite regress of things that have actuality and potential, and then something has to actualize it, something has to actualize it, something has to actualize it, you have to come to the unactualized actualizer, right? A thing that just is, right? A thing that just exists. And as Aquinas says, this is what we call God, right? This thing that exists and has the capacity to actualize the potential of other objects. And so this is his argument for the existence of God, that otherwise you get an infinite regress, and there need not be an infinite regress of causes. Now, this is a basic Aristotelian argument, as I say, that is shaped by Aquinas. There are other good arguments about this. One is based on the principle of sufficient reason, this idea that we have the capacity to understand the universe. So if you believe that you have the capacity to understand the universe, which most scientists and atheists believe, that we have the capacity to understand the universe, are there limitations to that capacity? So the principle of sufficient reason suggests there are no limitations, we just don't have enough information, but if given proper information, we can understand every aspect of the universe. If that's the case, then you have to ask, okay, that creates a system where, to understand things are contingent on one another, right? If a baseball hits a window, that's contingent on me hitting the baseball. So again, and this is true for every scientific law, laws of nature, right? If there's a law of gravity, then we try and discover why is there that law of gravity, where did that come from? And so the idea is that if you're a believer that we have the capacity to understand all of these things, and that we have the sufficient reason to understand the universe, then there has to be something outside the system of contingencies that got the ball rolling in the first place. Right? A timeless being that is pure existence. Again, it's a very similar argument. A timeless being, it has to exist outside of time because otherwise it would be fulfilling a potential. Things inside time always have a potential to be fulfilled. But things outside of time don't have a potential to be fulfilled. So I've described to a being that has pure existence, that exists outside of time, and that has the potential to actualize anything. That's God. So that's the argument in favor of God. Now, you don't have to buy it, but that's the evidence-based argument in favor of God. The problem that I have with scientific materialism is that all of human society is based on notions that are directly contrary to scientific materialism. And the reason that I say that atheism is not a good basis for a moral system is that atheism is not the basis for any moral system. There's no guiding principle. Right? I can make an equally valid argument on one side or another based on a system where there is no God, and not only no God, no being that created the universe in order to perform certain functions. So if you read Aristotle, what Aristotle says is that human beings were created to perform a certain function. Sorry, long-winded answer. That human beings were created to perform a certain function. That function was to reason, right? This is Aristotle's idea. And so every object was created to perform a certain function. Okay? If you don't believe that, if you believe that everything arose spontaneously or randomly, that just came about through pure chance, then you can't say that there's an is-ought gap that David Hume points out that is unbridgeable. You can't get from is to ought, and you have to make up your own moralities. That's the basic argument.
Okay. I actually agree with you with a lot of that, right? I don't think atheism is a point that we can really build off.
I'm not saying, by the way, that atheists can't be moral people. They absolutely can.
Oh, no, I'm not saying you are.
Yeah.
I simply, so how did you rule out, though, a naturalistic explanation, though, for the existence of reality? Because it kind of sounds like a God with the gaps argument, right? Or it's like, or an argument for incredulity, right? So essentially, I can't think of a better argument, therefore my argument, or therefore God.
No, I don't think that that's right. I think that the God of the gaps would say, things I don't know, I'm going to attribute to God. I'm saying that in order for anything to be actualized, there has to be something, and this is a basic principle.
Okay, thank you. Just really quick with that point and stuff. So if you're not familiar with theoretical physicists or particle physicists
yes.
like John Carroll and Lawrence Krauss, right, where essentially...
They say things kind of wink and blink out of existence, yes.
Yeah, with essentially things function different on a quantum level, right? So we live in a realm of Newtonian physics, right? So different, essentially, realm of domain of applicability as they...
Yes.
Right?
No, I understand this argument, yeah. So the idea, the Aristotelian Aquinas answer to that would be, you're still suggesting that there's a system in which that happens. Where does that system come from?
Okay, yeah.
Because otherwise you end up, basically, you end up with three final analyses of the possibilities of the universe. One is the unmoved mover, one is an infinite regress of causes, and one is the brute fact, the kind of Bertrand Russell argument that there are just brute facts in the universe and we can't understand them. Well, that doesn't really explain anything, the brute fact thing. Right? That is a God of the gaps argument, right? That's saying we can't explain it, it's a brute fact we're done. That's the same thing as a God of the gaps argument. Cool. Thank you.